Hey guys, I'm ZSH Plays, welcome back to Tekton Zoo. Today we're going to be here in the land of the reptiles building a big habitat for alligators, bullfrogs and terrapins. But the backstory is this is one of the original Tekton buildings that used to be a monkey house, and now the zoo is going to retrofit it for a swamp exhibit, including a walkthrough alligator exhibit. So let's get building. I cannot believe I built this twice in order to get a 10-second shot of the intro, but that's the kind of dedication I like to show. So yeah, the swamp. This has been on my mind for quite a while. If you remember way back when we built the Capuchin Tower, I spoke about how I had a couple of ideas of where to go with that area. Maybe a Americas area or maybe a primates area. And in the end, we decided to go with the primates. And that was sort of your consensus in the comments as well. So having decided to go with the primates there, I came up with some plans for an Americas area elsewhere in the zoo, and they kind of got out of hand pretty quickly. I ended up with this enormous area which would have required its own zoo really to do justice. So I abandoned the idea, but there was one aspect of it that I really liked, and I didn't want to just sort of throw that idea away, which was this walkthrough swamp exhibit, which is what we're building here. It's going to contain the American alligator, and then within the same building it'll also have American bullfrogs and the diamondback terrapin. So you can see I've actually copied the saltwater crocodile exhibit because I want a visual continuity between the habitats. But don't worry, when I finish they're going to look very different indeed, both inside and out. It's just to get mainly the roof and the shape of it, and it also happens to be the perfect size to get some alligators in here. So in this building I want at least 3 alligators and then the 2 exhibit buildings as well. So we've got the raised path in, and I'm just going to rough out the area where the exhibits are going to go. These are going to sit, basically look like they're actually inside the habitat, although I'm using null barriers so that the game knows that they're not inside the habitat, which you can see here. Otherwise it's not going to work. So I've built the glass barriers all the way around the building and then cut in with some null barriers around where the exhibits are going to go, and then deleted the glass ones, so we've still got a full habitat. And then I'm going to start dressing up the water. So I've looked at so many pictures of swamps in the United States to make this, and I'm trying to recreate as much of the vegetation that I saw as possible. So we're going to put a custom tree here. One of the features seems to be dead trees and then huge cypress trees, not the sort of cypress that we have in the game, a completely different type, which we don't have. I'm just going to use whatever I can find to make it look as close to the reference photos as possible. So I'm using a load of the dead Scotch pine here to make a big sort of dead custom tree. There seems to just be loads of tiny little trunks poking out of the water everywhere in all the photos I've looked at. I'm not sure even exactly what they are, but I'm just going to try and replicate it as much as I can. So this tree, I want it to be pretty sizable, which is why I'm using so many of the normal trees stuck together to get it to look big. And then this tree here, I forget what it's called, but this was really closely matching in terms of the foliage, a lot of the trees that I saw in the reference photo, so I'm going to use this a lot. And this also covers up the central column, so that when this is finished, it looks unique and not like the saltwater crocodile building that it's being copied from. So I'm going to cover up as much of it as possible. I want a really immersive environment here. And I want this to feel like a brand new building in the zoo, even though, like I said in the intro, this has been here since day one, but the zoo have decided to make a really immersive swamp experience in here. So I'm going to go absolutely crazy with the foliage and do a lot of work underwater as well. So using the long grass, which I really like the look of underwater, and then some of the new Europe pack pieces as well, the periwinkle leaves, which are one of my new favourite pieces in the game. They're so good. I think we used them in the fire salamander build, and I'm going to be putting them everywhere underwater here so that you get rid of that sort of bare terrain look that the game has by default and make it look really lush and swampy under here. This is the raised walkway, which is how this exhibit is going to work. So a word of warning, I'm building this in franchise mode, and I have encountered a bit of an issue with it. You won't get this in sandbox, but in franchise you will. Depending on where the alligators are in the water, sometimes the keepers and occasionally the guests will run away screaming. I think obviously alligators are not supposed to be a walk-through species, but I've seen designs, probably not as elaborate as this, but I've seen designs similar to this in zoos all over the world, where you are on some sort of raised walkway and the alligators etc are below you. But unfortunately in Planet Zoo there's no real way to do that. If you run a path through the habitat, the game is just going to assume that it's a walk-through habitat, and obviously an actual walk-through habitat where the alligators could get to you would not be a good idea. So I have not really found a way around that. If you know of a way around that in franchise mode, then please let me know in the comments. But it still works pretty well, but occasionally you will have the odd guest running away screaming. It doesn't happen that often, and most of the time they seem to enjoy it, and they are very happy with the view of the alligators, as you would expect. So that's the way I'm going to keep it. I'm doing a little trick here. I can't remember who I saw doing this, but using the recolorable flowers and then basically making them all different shades of brown, and they look like dead leaves just laying on the floor, which looks really cool, especially for this type of habitat. So they're going to go absolutely everywhere. Getting back to the path, probably in a British zoo, I am not sure that people would make a habitat like this anymore, because while the guests are perfectly safe on the path, there's nothing to stop them throwing themselves into the alligator pool. Now, my personal opinion on that is, if you want to do that, go ahead. I don't think the world will be saddened by that loss, but in other countries in the world that are a bit less fussed about that kind of thing, you can still see habitats like this where if for some bizarre reason they wanted to, the guests could just dive in. So that's what I'm going to go with. I will be adding a load of mesh to the sides of the path later on, because obviously you don't want kids falling through the bars. That would definitely be a bad thing. Another thing I'm doing in this, which I'm really pleased with, is using the moss decals to place actually on the surface of the water to look like the sort of algae or weeds. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but obviously swamps are absolutely full of that. The water is always covered in sort of mats of green plant life, and the decals look absolutely amazing when you do that. That's one of the things that I'm most happy with in this habitat. But again, another issue I found, which I am going to raise with Frontier actually, is that I think the decals actually have a hitbox. So if you put like moss decals on the water, sometimes the alligators will actually climb up on them and walk Jesus style across the water before going back into the water again. I'm assuming that is not intended. I can't think of any reason why you would want the decals to have a hitbox, so I am going to raise that as an issue with Frontier, and hopefully that'll get fixed, because they look amazing when they swim next to them, and then really weird when suddenly this giant alligator is being supported by a little mat of moss. Moving on, we're going to do a lot of work on vegetation around the back walls. You can see I've started putting decals in as well. So this habitat would have been restored to be absolutely perfect when the zoo decided to redo it. And then to go with the sort of decayed, swampy theme, they'll be essentially weathering the structure, just the surface of it, to make it look like it's old and decrepit, and I'm putting all sorts of decals everywhere so it looks really, really worn, which is the sort of theme I'm going for, and that will be continued on the outside of the habitat as well, because I don't do a lot of theming in this zoo. I guess the aesthetic of the zoo is its own theme, so I try and make everything pristine white concrete. So in terms of actual theming like you get in a modern zoo where each habitat tries to make you feel like you're in a different part of the world or whatever, I don't really do a lot of that, so I thought it'd be a lot of fun to do that here and really get that sort of themed swampy vibe going on all the way through the habitat. Now, while I finish off the alligator part of the habitat, I've got a question for you guys. So I was thinking the other day about how I learned how to play this game watching speed builds from DeLadySigner and Pulsley and people like that. I was thinking, would it be useful for you guys to have build-along episodes whereby alongside each one of our normal episodes would be another video with the full unedited speed build at half the speed it normally is in these videos, so that you guys can follow along and build it yourself. I have absolutely no idea if that would be of any use to anyone, so if it would do, let me know in the comments and I will sort that out. Otherwise we can just file that away in the terrible ideas pile. Let's move on to the exhibits now. I mentioned at the start I wanted these to sit within the habitat, so the way I'm doing it is with those null barriers the game won't consider this to be part of the habitat, so I can just put them here, and I'm going to build a hut around them so it fits in nicely with the theme, and the exhibits will sit within this hut, so it shouldn't look out of place. This will look like some little swamp hut at the end of the habitat, and then you'll be able to see the bullfrogs and the terrapins in here. So I'm just using loads of different wood pieces to put this together and trying to make it look as sort of run down and janky as possible. Just copy that over to the other side, and then we're going to build some viewing windows in so that the guests can see into the exhibits. It's kind of fun building with wood. That is not something that I ever do really. Everything's plaster pieces, as you know. So I'm using a lot of pieces here that I very, very rarely use. This is really simple, this little hut, but it took me quite a while to put it together just because I'm not used to using these pieces. So we're going to have this corrugated iron roof, which I think is from the Australia pack. It's a really, really cool roof. Such a good piece. It's been weathered and ruined really well, which is exactly the look that I want. So I'm going to put this roof on, and while I was building it I was just thinking, what am I doing? This is so strange. And I finally realised that there isn't a single pitched roof in this zoo. Every roof is flat. Every building either has a flat roof or no roof at all. It was kind of weird trying to remember how to actually build these and what pieces you need to use to fill in the gaps. But I got there in the end, and I'm pretty happy with how it looks. It's this sort of rundown little shack. Sits really nicely into the habitat and doesn't get in the way. It's going to be off the ground, which a lot of these sort of swamp huts are. Obviously you're in an area that is heavily waterlogged, and if that water level rises, having a house that's sat on the floor is not going to be a good idea. So I'm using some of the African pieces for the legs, and then this Arctic piece, which I absolutely love. This there's like a set of these pieces to build sort of ruined ships with. I love them and I've never ever used them because I've never found a use for them. So I'm very happy to finally have a reason to use those pieces. And finally we're going to put that mesh in around the path, like I mentioned earlier, to keep the little kiddies safe as they're walking around the alligator habitat. And then we'll move on and take care of the final part of the build, the exterior. So this is the entrance that I've come up with, all the basics of it anyway. I've made it with a sort of signage that we'd normally use in the zoo, and then I'm going to bring this theme that we've had running throughout the whole build into it and make it look a lot more like a highly themed modern zoo build. And I'll be using loads of decals to weather it and make it look like it is old and swampy. Although to be honest, I'm not sure anyone will ever build anything again in this game without putting decals everywhere. They're just so good. The backs of these plant panels are amazing. They're such good pieces, so I'm using those underneath the title, and then I'm going to rotate the title and sink this in so it follows the curve of the building and sits in nicely. So just a few more decals and plants to place in, and that is the swamp completed. It is immediately one of my favourite builds in the zoo. I absolutely love this. Thank you so much for watching as always. Next time I think we are going to be tackling the nocturnal house, which is going to be a big build. Might not fit that all into one episode, so that will probably be out in a couple of weeks. Next week's episode will be in a different zoo. More on that later. Stick around for the cinematics. Thanks for watching. Bye.